I was driving home from my friend's house. It was late. I don't know exactly the time, but if I had to guess, it was probably 2 or 3 a.m. I lived 20 minutes away, which wasn't too far, since most houses around here are spread out. The rain and lack of streetlights made it hard to see though, so I was driving slower and more carefully. 5 minutes down the road, I pulled up to a traffic light. I had the red light, but there was a blue car on the other side, who was on the road, partially in the intersection. Its headlights and everything were on, but it was just sitting there at a green light. I couldn't tell if there was something wrong, or maybe they were asleep, but when the lights changed, I drove forward, slowly maneuvering around them. I tried to discreetly look in their car as I passed, but the rain on my window blocked most of my view. Only a moment after passing them and driving down the road again, the blue car turned and started following me down the road, so it wasn't broken down after all. I kept my eye on the mirrors. I wouldn't consider myself a paranoid person, but the situation felt staged. Another minute down the road, the car's headlights started getting brighter in my mirrors as they pulled their car closer to what felt like just a couple of feet from my back bumper. In weather like this, that made me really uncomfortable. I looked back at the road, but saw a small light pop up on my dashboard. It was a signal that one of my tires was low on air. A common signal, but it felt like an odd time for it just to pop up, given the situation. I looked back in my mirrors, seeing the car still tailing me. They were so close, their headlights almost made it hard to even see the actual car. I was just 4 or 5 minutes away from home, nearing the entrance to the neighborhood, when my dashboard started flickering a new signal: flat tire. My stomach dropped. The second I saw that signal, I put all the pieces together and was almost 100% sure that this car behind me had done something. I drove another minute, hoping to make it closer to home, but I could feel my car sinking to the left and I was practically driving on the rims now. I had to pull over. The car behind me did the same. I should have called someone as soon as I parked, but I was so concerned and focused with what the person behind me was doing that it didn't even cross my mind. Though, even if I did call someone, it probably wouldn't have prevented what happened next. Once parked, 3 doors opened from the car and 3 men came out. I only had a few seconds to prepare and react, but I was helpless and defenseless. They ran up to my car, 2 on my side and 1 on the other. One of the men came right up to my window, yelling at me to open the door and pointing a gun at me. It happened so fast, I was just in some dazed state. I started to reach for the door, but the man by the back door smashed something against the window, shattering it, then reached his hand in and opened the back door. They were all still yelling, both at me and at each other. The man in the back reached across, opening the other back door, then reached in front of me to open my door. I was still just sitting there, holding my hands up now to show I wasn't a threat. I knew there was no way out of this, even if I did have a weapon. Once my door was open, the man with the gun pulled me out of the car and slammed me on the ground. The oddest thing is, while I was on the ground, looking out into the rainy pavement, all I was thinking about was how cold and wet the pavement was, not about how I had a gun being pushed into the back of my head, or that I was being robbed and beaten. I think it was my head trying to distance myself from the traumatizing situation I was in. I wasn't on the ground for long before the men by the car called out and the guy holding me down hit me in the back of the head, causing me to ricochet off the pavement. I wasn't even sure if he hit me with a gun or just his fist, because I was already numb. I'm surprised it didn't knock me out though. I heard their car doors close and then driving away. I rolled over, still in a daze, and tried to pick myself up. They'd taken my phone, so I was forced to drive my car home and call the police when I got there, which ended up denting and damaging my rims anyway. The investigation went nowhere, determining only that the suspects had purposefully placed small tire spikes in the road at the intersection I crossed them at. I got lucky to have only hit 1 spike in 4 to have caused less damage than usual. They likely planned to ambush me as soon as I hit the trap, but in the end, it didn't make a difference. This happened on New Year's Eve back in 2017. I'm from Ohio, just outside of Cleveland, and I was flying home after finishing up a semester at the University of Rochester. I had to stay at school a week after the semester ended for personal reasons, so I unfortunately spent Christmas relatively alone. The flight itself was fine, but I'd already been in a sour mood before I even boarded the plane. I'm a big Browns fan, and as I was at the airport, the Browns lost their final game of the regular season to go 0-16, completely winless. And as a lifelong fan, it was a special kind of misery. I think we were the first team to go winless since like the 80s or something. To top it off, my flight was delayed, which ruined my family's plans for the night. Originally, we were all supposed to drive to my cousin's house together for a New Year's Eve party and stay the night. But because of the delay, my parents decided to leave early, taking the main car. I was stuck driving the spare car alone. My mom tried to make it up to me by leaving Vera, our golden retriever, behind to keep me company. I wasn't thrilled about making the trip solo, but Vera was always good company. I figured I'd make the most of it. By the time my Uber dropped me off from the airport, it was creeping on 10 o'clock. I didn't even bother unpacking. I just jammed all my stuff in the car, got Vera, locked up the house, and got on the road. The drive itself wasn't anything special, just miles of Ohio backroads winding through empty fields and patches of forest. There wasn't much snow on the ground, just a light dusting, which was nice since I hated driving in the snow. It was pitch black dark though. The only light came from my headlights and the occasional farmhouse with its porch light glowing faintly in the distance. About halfway into the trip, Vera started whining. At first, I thought she just wanted attention, but then she stood up, pacing in the passenger seat. That's when I realized she needed to go to the bathroom. I groaned, knowing there wasn't much else I could do but pull over. The next clearing I came across was small, barely enough space for the car, but it would have to do. I remembered noting to myself how dark it really was out there. If not for the patches of white snow here and there, I probably wouldn't have been able to see into the woods at all. I jammed my hands in my pockets and tried my best not to freeze to death. Vera didn't seem to care about the cold or the darkness. Classic golden retriever. I let her out, not even bothering to leash her. She sniffed around the edge of the trees, taking her sweet time. She didn't wander far, just enough to do her business. And that's when I heard it. All of a sudden, a loud crashing sound echoed from somewhere in the woods. It wasn't just a branch breaking. It was heavier and deliberate, like someone or something was moving through the trees. I literally jumped from how loud it was. Imagine a grown man sprinting through the forest. That's genuinely what it sounded like. I scanned the darkness, squinting to make out anything, but it was too dark to see beyond the first few trees. Before I could react, Vera bolted directly into the woods. It was some worst nightmare type stuff, I'm telling you. She disappeared into the trees, and I lost sight of her in mere seconds. I yelled her name over and over, but she didn't come back. At that point, my heart was racing and it started getting hard to breathe. The cold didn't help matters. I couldn't leave her out there. That wasn't an option. Without thinking, I ran into the woods blindly, yelling for her to come back. I didn't want to think about what she was chasing after, so I just ran, letting the adrenaline take over. The only light to aid me was my dim phone flashlight and the thin layer of snow on the ground. It was so dark, I was practically running into the trees. I kept running, praying I'd find her before she caught up to whatever was in there. I ran until my lungs gave out from the cold, forcing me to take a break. After nearly falling over from exhaustion, I leaned up against a tree and felt myself about to break down. I honestly didn't know what to do. Then finally, I saw her. She was crouched low and shivering, walking slowly toward me. Her tail was tucked tightly between her legs. I had never seen her like that before. I dropped to my knees and embraced her. Relief flooded through me. She pressed against me, and I could feel her body trembling. Something had terrified her. That's when I snapped back to reality and realized how serious the situation was. We were still in the middle of the woods, and there was still something out there. I sprung up from my position and told Vera to follow me. This time she obeyed and stuck by my side like her life depended on it. We started back to the car, but I had no idea if I was going the right way. As if things weren't bad enough, I damn near jumped out of my skin when I heard crashing from behind me. I didn't think, I just started running. Vera darted ahead of me and I followed her, praying I didn't trip. The crashing sound didn't stop this time. It seemed like it was following us. I can't even tell you how scared I was in that moment. I genuinely felt like I was going to die. By some miracle, Vera led me straight back to the car, and I practically threw her inside before slamming the door shut. As I was jumping in the driver's seat, I glanced back towards the woods and my stomach dropped. There were 3 figures standing at the edge of the woods, watching us. I jammed the keys in the ignition and floored it out of there. I didn't stop, I didn't even slow down. I was still in shock. It wasn't until I had driven a few miles that I noticed Vera was bleeding. I started panicking as I realized there was a cut just below her shoulder blade. Someone had stabbed her. I slammed on the brakes and ran around the car to the trunk. My mom always kept a first aid kit in every car, and for once, her insistence on being overly prepared paid off. I cleaned Vera's cut as best I could and wrapped it in gauze. She whimpered and I worried that I was hurting her, but I knew I was doing the right thing. For the first time since the whole sequence had started, I felt myself begin to relax. It was over. I tried not to think about it for the rest of the drive, but I was just so shell-shocked that something like that had happened to me. I ended up not telling my parents or relatives, I don't know why. It just felt like one of those things you keep to yourself. I remember this Walmart, sort of where I live, that used to be open 24 hours. I'm not sure, but I think there were a lot of Walmarts that used to be open 24 hours. All the ones that I've been to in recent years close at like 10 p.m. now though. Maybe the reason is because of things happening like the story I'm about to tell you. This was several years ago, probably about 2014. I remember that I worked a job back then with all kinds of crazy hours. I never really knew when I would get off of work, and some nights were really late. One time I got off of work at close to 3 a.m. By the time I was done, I was exhausted, but also really hungry. On my way home, I stopped at the 24-hour Walmart to see what they had. There were no restaurants nearby that were still open, and I was just going to go down the snack aisle and maybe find something to drink as well. When I got inside, I made my way over to the food. The store was almost completely empty. I only saw a couple of employees here and there. When I got to the snack aisle, I browsed around for a little bit. I wasn't really sure exactly what I was hungry for. I often have a hard time deciding what to eat or where to get food from. I browsed for maybe 5 minutes, and then I had this feeling like I was being watched. It seemed a little strange, and I looked around. When I looked to the far end of the aisle, I saw a man standing there looking towards me. He was a sort of tall and skinny guy, wearing a black Adidas sweatshirt. When he saw me looking at him, he just kept standing there. He wasn't looking at anything on the shelves in particular. He looked away from me, but I thought the guy seemed really weird. I went back to looking at the food on the shelves and tried to make up my mind. I wandered into the next aisle over. There was more food in that aisle. I was there for no more than 10 seconds, and I noticed a man creeping around the corner slowly, and then looking at me again from the end of the aisle. This was really strange. I grabbed a bag of trail mix and then made my way towards the back of the store, along the side. Once I was at the far back corner of the store, I decided to walk back to one of the main walkways. But when I got there, the man was already standing there, looking at me. I started walking all around the store, and the man seemed to be following me. He kept slowly walking around the store, trailing me wherever I went, and it was really frustrating. His face was almost expressionless the entire time, and he never spoke a word. Finally, I said, "Forget this," and I went to the checkout area. There was only one check lane still open, and I told the cashier that some guy had been following me around the store. The man did not follow me into the checkout, but instead wandered off into the clothing area that was across from the check lanes. She just kind of said, "Thanks for letting us know," and agreed that it was weird. I just wanted to get home, eat something, and go to bed. After I was done checking out, I walked down towards the exit doors. I was sure to scan over and make sure that the creepy guy was not once again following me. I was really happy to see that he wasn't. When I made it out the door, I walked through the parking lot to my car. My car was parked a little ways from the doors. It wasn't in the far back end of the parking lot, but it wasn't really that close either. The parking lot was mostly empty, but there were a few cars scattered all around, most of which I'm guessing were employees. Right as I was starting my engine, I looked up and noticed something. There was a man, sprinting at full speed from the Walmart headed straight for my car. It was the same guy that had been following me around. The way that he was running was so fast, like he was running for his life. But he wasn't running away from anything. He was running for me. There was a second or two where I was so confused that I just watched him. That was until I realized he was going to reach my car very quickly. Then I put my car into drive and got out of there. I pulled away probably just a couple of seconds before he would have reached me. He kept running though, all the way until I was out of the parking lot and on the street. Then I was easily able to get away. I was really confused who the man was, why he followed me around in the store, and why he had ran full speed at me when I was in my car. The lesson I learned from this was to not go back to Walmart in the middle of the night.